I'm Karen. I'm an alcoholic. I normally like to start off with what it's like now. It helps keep me grounded. I know that when I first came into these rooms, and for the first couple of years, I really appreciated people who told me how they were making it through their day now. I didn't want to hear about the big book, and I didn't want to be sold on AA. I was already here. I already had the sponsor. I was already doing what I needed to do. It was just, how in the hell are you getting through this thing, man? And all I know is tonight, when I saw one of my sponsees walk through the door, I have 3 here today, I got really emotional. I had a really rough time about 4 weeks ago. The man I had a crush on came over to my house and said, "I don't love you and I'm never going to be in love with you." The next morning, I got a phone call, and the most important person who had ever stepped foot in my life, I found out had died. And at 8 years sober, I was sitting at the kitchen table, and I was completely broken. My heart was just broken. I didn't know how I was going to go on. And so I'm having a little talk with God, my higher power. I'm just going to call it God. Just get over it if you have an issue. It's short, it's simple. And all of a sudden I had this overwhelming feeling of love, and it wasn't love for me. It was for all the people I love, and it brought me back. I wanted to continue loving the people that I love, and these 3 women right here are part of the reason that I'm standing here today, and I bet they don't know that, but it was my love for you. And then, of course, my sponsee showed up, and I had to work with her, so that kind of blew all that, And I had phone calls, and people came over with soup and cookies and brownies and told me they loved me. And it's just, I've been grieving for a few weeks now, and each day it just gets better. I grieve less. And that's just one of the gifts that the program's given me. So I just thought I'd start out with that, because it's amazing to me to be standing up here and to have these women, and a grand sponsee as well, who I'm just meeting tonight. So, but my day today, I thought, woohoo! Now I've got to admit that I've become completely powerless and overwhelmed in my life. My life has become unmanageable. All of the things that I asked to have happen, when I was sitting and resting on my laurels and, was kind of bored, all happened at once, right? So my life has gotten jammed packed with responsibility and work and blessings, but it's too much for me, and I know it, but I'm making it through. So I thought, woohoo, I don't have a day to do anything except show up at a noon meeting and be treasurer. But that wasn't true. I went to my folks' house up in Healdsburg and fought with AT&T for them. Then I met a friend of mine. He's one of my best male friends, and he just kicks ass, and I get to cry and whine about my love life. And so we met and had coffee. I took him to the meeting with me. After the meeting, I went back home, set up the appointment for the AT&T guy to come over so I could fight with him some more. And then my brake light isn't working, so a member of AA, who I know up in Healdsburg, he came over to work on my light. Then a girlfriend from Santa Rosa who's in AA called me, and she was in crisis, so she drove up to Healdsburg and sat at my kitchen table. AT&T guy came, fought with him, no good, called the billing people, and I got my folks set up. My mom, okay, she also cracked her sternum. She's 83 years old. My dad's 90, so this is why I'm kind of doing what I can for them. And then somehow I made it here. And everything took a little bit longer than I thought it would, everything, but I made it, and I was on time, so that was cool. So it sounds like a lot of AA, doesn't it? And I never meant for that to happen, But that's what happens when you stick around long enough and you meet some really good people and you get to love other people and other people get to love you. It's a pretty amazing way to walk through life, and I'm very, very grateful for that. In fact, I was thinking the other day, I started my hardcore drinking a little late, not until I was 33, and I had had a spiritual awakening before that in my 20s. And I remember just the other day I was thinking, oh my God, if I had only had this experience of AA now than I had back in my 20s, because as amazing as it was, I still felt different, and I felt not a part of, and I felt like I still had to hide those secrets of my imperfection. I still felt like I had to try to pretend to be somebody else and hold myself to this outrageous standard. And thank God I became an alcoholic. Thank God I got to come into meetings. Thank God for the fifth step when I got to admit my character defects and have a loving sponsor who heard me and loved me anyway. And she was the first person and the first thing that allowed me to start hooking up to my higher power again. Because I didn't think my higher power was going to forgive me for what I had done, for becoming an alcoholic, for picking up smoking, for becoming and getting involved in an abusive relationship and not leaving it. I didn't think I was going to get forgiven for any of those things because I knew better. So I guess I'll start out with, or secondly, what it was like. Now, I've been recorded at this meeting twice before, and it was so funny. I was sitting here when there was a call out for the cookies and there was a call out for the alkathon, and I had to giggle at myself. And I think I've been showing up at this meeting consistently, maybe 4 times in a row, 5 times in a row, and yet I'm still in denial that I'm going to come back next week. Don't count on me. Well, I think I'm just going to have to cave in and start participating. But I was thinking about the first time I was recorded. I was probably 2 years sober. My sponsor at the time was the secretary. She told me I had to start coming because she was here. And I was driving on my way, and I got a phone call from her, and she said, "You're speaking for me tonight." And I was like, "Well, I'm going to be late." She says, "I don't care." So I stand up here, and I start to speak, and my poor parents. You know, when you have 40 minutes to talk, you know, and you're only 2 years sober, you have a lot to say about your parents. And so a lot of that, and I recall it at 15 after, looking over at her and saying, "Do I really have to keep on talking?" And she said, "Yes." I don't know what probably more about my parents is what I probably came up with at that point. But my childhood was painful. My childhood was just painful. And I escaped through reading when I was allowed to. It was a very strict household as well. So when I was allowed to watch TV, I watched as much as I could. I was that kid on Saturday morning who got very excited. I'm 47, so this was back before cable. And I get very excited on Saturday mornings, and I'd wake up, good Lord, probably at 5 o'clock without an alarm and sit there in front of the TV with the test pattern going. I was just very excited because they'd let me watch cartoons all morning, right? And I was incredibly shy and incredibly fearful. So everything seemed to be very unpleasant, and it just, I made it through. I made it through. Like my parents didn't drink because my grandparents did. So there was no alcohol in the house, no cussing, no swearing, no smoking. I got my mouth washed out for saying the word hate. I mean, it was really, we were really held up. My mother was training me. She was training me to be the future first wife of America. You know, I was going to marry the president because that's the best a woman could do, according to her. So I had to be perfect. And by the time I was a junior in high school, I was suicidal and ended up in the hospital. I started drinking my senior year heavily, or more often, my senior year in high school when I met a frat boy. and started going to the frat parties, and that was really fun and cool because I had found out from my first drink when I was the summer of my 8th grade year, I have a craving that gets kicked off like nobody's business. And it's just out of control. As soon as I put enough alcohol in my body, because I learned later on that if I only drank, if it was a real light wine or one that didn't have much alcohol content, I could probably get away with a half a glass and not have that craving kick off. But any more than that, and it was just balls to the wall. I was going to drink as much as possible, as soon as possible, as quickly as possible, and what's your problem? You know, I'm still up and functioning. Sort of. And so it just, because of my home environment, because I was so shy and I wasn't hanging out with the cool kids, I didn't have a whole lot of access to alcohol until my senior year. And then, like I said, that was great because then I got to drink with all those hunky frat boys. And I headed off to college to Montana in 1985. The drinking age there was only 19, so I could grab somebody's ID, and I started bar hopping as often as I could. I was there on an academic scholarship, and I was on academic probation after the very first semester because I had other things to do. But that whole reliance on alcohol to change the way I felt never really occurred to me. I mean, from pretty early on, I was in therapy. I was going to therapy. I thought something was intrinsically wrong with me as a human being. I thought the bad things that were happening was because of who I was. And I just thought I was screwed. Let's just be honest. You know, I just thought, I'm just destined for a life of pain. This pain is never going to go away. So after I left that first year of college, I started to work. And I found out I loved to work. It was that substitute. It gave me some self-esteem. I felt good about it. I had a good work ethic. And I was able to afford, back at that time, the economy was pretty good. I could move out, start supporting myself. Always had other boyfriends, older boyfriends who could get me booze. And things were okay. They weren't out of control, primarily because I just didn't really keep it in the home. But boy, I still thought that drinking was cool. And when I drank, I really drank. So that lasted until the age of 23, where I was a periodic drinker, and when I drank heavily. It probably would have ended up becoming a serious problem if I hadn't had a spiritual awakening. And I use that term because that's the term that the big book uses. At the time, all I know is that it felt like I got it. And all of a sudden, my whole world changed. And it felt like I was plugged into this electric socket with just this straight energy flowing through my body. And it was an incredible experience, and it lasted for several years. I got to it through the perennial philosophy, which just talks about the underlying truths through all religions and all spiritual traditions. And it felt like my truth. And for the first time, it felt like I was hearing my own truth. I felt like I wasn't alone. I had a spiritual teacher, and who I started dating after a year. And we were together for 10 years. And what ended up happening is that what happens to a lot, almost everybody that I know that's on a spiritual path, we have that moment where we feel betrayed. And for me, that perfectionism hadn't stopped at all. What I was now trying to be is spiritually perfect. And so because I was trying so hard to be spiritually perfect for my higher power, because I was going to become enlightened and I was going to become, pristine, I was doing my job. I was asking my higher power all the time, what do I do here? How do I handle this? I was having these amazing experiences. And when something bad happened and didn't go my way, I threw a temper tantrum, and I got really hurt. It brought up all that pain of rejection and betrayal from my childhood. And I got very upset, and I kicked God out of my life. I just said, I'm not going to work for you anymore until you prove to me that you're worth working for again. Thinking that I could have that connection back anytime I wanted. I was wrong. But what ended up happening during my little year on probation, my dear higher power, was that alcohol started creeping into my life because it was the closest I could feel to that ease and comfort that I had had when I was hooked up. And it wasn't very often. Maybe once a month I was having a beer when I got off work. I was working for the university up in Oregon at the time. But little by little, the drinking started to grow, not too much, but maybe then it was like 2 beers once every month or so. And I was sitting in my house one day in the year 2000, and I said, you know what, because I still believed in God. Don't get me wrong. I was just pissed off at it. I was just pissed off at my higher power. Didn't mean I'd stop believing. And I said, you know what, I got this pretty knocked down. You know, I need a challenge. Teach me what I have not learned yet. And 2 months later, I had broken up with my spiritual teacher, and I had married an alcoholic. And I got humbled. And after a year of marriage, I started drinking with him. Because I was way too prideful. I had waited until I was 33 to get married, and nobody thought it was a good idea that I marry this man who I'd only dated for 2 months. And I was not going to tell them that they were right, and I was not going to give back the gosh darn wedding presents. That's all there was to it. So a year after we're married, and he's hiding his drinking from me. At the time, I don't really know he's an alcoholic. He's just, as far as I know, I'm picking him up from work. Okay, that's kind of a clue when they don't have a car and can't drive, all right? And they're painters and work in construction, okay? You think I would have... My doctor, oh my gosh, that's right. I was going to fix his life. I'd forgotten this, so I took him to, oh yeah, all of it. And I took him to the doctor, my doctor, and I was even in the room with him. I was so codependent, oh my God. So I take him to my doctor, and we're in the room, and he kind of says, hey, do you think, painters kind of have a problem with drinking. Maybe you're a weekend alcoholic, and he's kind of looking at my ex-husband, and my ex-husband, his eyes are like this big, and I go, oh no, he doesn't drink that much. All right, so I answered his question for him, and I was wrong. So a year later, I've moved across country to Florida, away from my support system, away from my job. I've cashed out my retirement. I've eliminated the money I was saving to buy a home, and my dearest cat got run over. And I took my first drink to deliberately change the way I felt for the first time at age 34. That's when I say I started to become an alcoholic. I was predisposed the whole time. I had the craving the whole time. But until I coupled that sense of relief with my allergy, with my genetic structure, I could still sort of manage it. And pretty soon I was having a beer with my husband. I was devastated. I was, again, too prideful to go back to Oregon with my tail between my legs, and my drinking progressed. And so from that time in 2001, with that first drink, until I got sober in 2006, within that period of time, I went from drinking a beer not even every day with my husband to drinking over a fifth of whiskey a day. And I say it's a half gallon, I always bought the handles, but there would be about this much left. So however much that is, but that's well over a fifth, right? So I'm saturated, and by the end, by 2006, I'm an alcoholic. I know it. I've completely given up. the 2 times that I kind of tried to stop, I got it almost immediately that this thing had me, that there was no way, that I was powerless over it. So I really got it. And the best I thought that I could do was just drink myself to death. So then I started smoking too, because the drinking was taking too long. So I'll just go ahead and smoke too, because now I'm depressed. I've split up from my ex-husband. There's a restraining order against him. I'm stuck in a town of 210 people in the middle of Idaho. I'm working at a lodge, an upscale lodge, 4 nights a week as a night auditor, 10 hours a night. I'm not drinking during that time, but I'm drinking so much during the day and then passing out that when I wake up and I go to work, if I haven't taken a shower, and even if I had, I'm still reeking like booze because my body can't even process it. And I'm just waiting to die. But I do have a really cute, codependent younger boyfriend who is sort of helping. He's coming over, giving me those hugs and squeezes and pouring my booze down the sink and crying and begging me to stop drink. And I've just said, I'm drinking to myself to death. If you don't like it, leave. I said that to him over and over and over again. It wasn't very nice. So I get called out at work. So getting sober wasn't my idea, folks. It stuck me in a pickle. How in the heck am I supposed to drink myself to death if I can't afford the booze? So they let me keep working until, thinking that I was going to go get sober, and I didn't do that. I just kept drinking more and more and more, thinking, oh, the end is about to come, so I better hurry up, drink as much as I possibly can. Plus, now I don't have the ex-husband. I don't have to go around to the bars and pay all of his tabs off. It's all mine. What ended up happening is I felt the boom coming, that they were going to fire me. I knew it, and I took the suggestion that the drug and alcohol assessor had told me to take, who I had been forced to go see, and I called my parents, my estranged parents in Healdsburg, and said, I didn't call them, I emailed them in the middle of the night because that's how chicken I am, and I said, I have a problem, can I come stay with you? And they said, yes, we love you, come. And I couldn't believe it. I was absolutely floored. And then the second email from them said, do you really have to bring your cats with you? I think those are on my other 2 recordings too. I love my cats. And I said, yes, I do, as a matter of fact. So I jumped in the car, or didn't jump on the car. I drank as much as humanly possible. I left on a Tuesday from Idaho, made it to Winnemucca, into Santa Rosa. My last drunk was nothing. I didn't even get drunk. It really ticked me off. I bought a case of beer, a half case of beer in the hotel room the night before in Winnemucca, and I couldn't even drink enough to get drunk. I was so used to the whiskey. the beer didn't even do anything. Anyway, so that was kind of a bummer, but I still threw in like the 3 cans that were left into my backpack. Headed off with my cats up the 101, pulled over to the side. It was about 10 o'clock in the morning, downed those 2 of the beers over on the side of the road before I could get to my parents' house and announce, hi, here I am. Staring and checking out to see where the liquor stores were and the grocery stores were. Where was I going to get the booze in Healdsburg, right? Because I didn't know if I could stay sober. I didn't really even want to. I was done. That whatever soul that I felt like I had was almost completely gone or anesthetized. It just, there was nothing here that I wanted to save. And because I had nothing, maybe because I had absolutely nothing, as I was driving up to my parents' house and I pulled into the driveway, that God that I had, that I have, I said, I can give you this gift. I believe that I'm going to go insane because of all the pain that I've been through if I stop drinking. or I believe that I'm going to die from not drinking anymore. But if it's the last thing I do, I'll give you this one gift and I'll stop drinking. I'm done. And then I went into the house and I told my parents, do you know where the nearest hospital is? They said, yes, right across the street. I said, because I don't know what's going to happen. And they said, okay, honey. They don't remember this conversation at all. Here was this big conversation. They don't remember it at all. Go upstairs and have it, go to sleep. So smoked one cigarette out the window, and drank the beer, went to bed, woke up in the morning, and what the hell was I going to do? I'm not insane, and I'm alive, and I don't know what the hell to do now. So I paddled downstairs in my pajamas, and luckily for me, and I'm still alive, and I'm still alive, and I'm still alive, and luckily for me, they had set up an appointment with the Orinda Center for their outpatient program. So I show up there, I lie, I say I've been sober over 24 hours, or 48 or whatever they wanted. And they tell me to stay on the waiting list. I have to go to AA meetings, and they give me a sheet. The next day, they take me to another outpatient program in Santa Rosa, and I get interviewed there. And I don't like them. And I didn't like them because they tried to sell me, and because their big selling point was that God wasn't even mentioned in their program. And I'll tell you, when I did that utter and complete surrender, that obsession was lifted immediately. And there was no way. I might not know why I'm alive. I might not know why God kept me alive. But I sure as heck wasn't going to throw whatever that was away. So I show up at my first meeting on Saturday morning in Healdsburg. It's a women's group. It's a closed meeting. I show up with my mother. She was 79, I think, at the time. And we go in, and they say this is a closed meeting, and you need to go see somebody. You need to go somewhere else if you're not an alcoholic. And my mother stays still. And we go around the room, and they get to me. Now, look, I have a piece of paper, certified piece of paper, saying I'm an alcoholic. I have lost control. I've lost control of my drinking, and they still get around to me, and I say, I'm Karen, and I don't know what I'm doing here. They get to my mother, my little mother, and she bursts into tears. Oh, let me stay. This is my daughter. And they let her stay. They let her stay. And I remember this one woman in particular. She was moving out of the area. I think she left 2 weeks later, or that week. And I remember these women talking, and they were talking about sponsorship. But all I saw, what I wanted, was these women were able to say they were an alcoholic, and they didn't have the shame I felt. They seemed to like themselves. They seemed like they felt like they deserved to live. And that was just incredible to me. That's what I wanted. I didn't know if I could have it, but I was just looking at these women going, oh my God, you can actually admit you're an alcoholic and think you don't deserve to die? That's incredible. Or that you think you deserve to live and have a good life, and that you can like yourself in spite of that. That was insane to me. That's what I wanted, and by the end of the meeting, when women came up to greet me, the first words out of my lips were, I need a sponsor. And the woman who had come up to me said, well, that's interesting, because I need a sponsee. I haven't had one yet, and now you're mine. And she gave me a big book. She gave me a 12 by 12, or I bought it. She wasn't that nice. So I had a big book. I walked out of there with a big book with a 12 by 12 with I think a grapevine even, and they actually had speakers on CD there too, or tape. So I had one of those. And she gave me a meeting schedule, and this was the coolest thing, and I highly suggest if you ever run into a newcomer, or you're talking to one after the meeting, grab a schedule, because what she did is she highlighted all the meetings I should go to. And it gave me a place to go. Otherwise, I would have been completely lost. I was new to the area, didn't know anything, didn't know any of you people. Well, and she gave me a place, and it gave me a place to go every day. Now, I was messed up. I did not go through detox. Don't ask me how that happened, but I went through a horrendous amount of pain. All of that alcohol started going out of my body. All of those injuries started coming up. My coordination was off. I couldn't think straight. I used to carry an extra shirt in the back of my car because every meeting I went to, I spilled coffee all over myself. They'd laugh. I got railroaded into a commitment right away. I was supposed to go back to the job that had, in 2 months, I was supposed to get sober and then go back. And the women stared me in the face and said, "Do you have food, shelter, water here?" And I said, "Yes." And then they said, "Then you are not going back." And I did. I went back and picked up my stuff and moved it here. And healthiest choice. And I let people make those choices for me. And you know what? They were pretty sane. They were pretty good choices. And when I came in, I didn't trust. I sure as heck didn't trust myself. I didn't trust this God that I had, and I didn't trust any of you folks. Yet somehow in that humility at that bottom, that willingness, that just whatever, okay, I have nothing, I had no will of my own to really even fight against it. If I had had even an ounce more of pride, we would have been in some serious trouble. As it was, that surrender was complete. I didn't know what I was doing. I was willing, and I accepted that I didn't know what the heck I was doing, and that's it. I just put one foot in front of the other. I ran the car into my parents' garage door because my coordination was still off. They forgave me. Turns out that one of the reasons they were very nice to me was because their golden child, their favorite son, I found out when I moved here, is an alcoholic too. That had been a big family secret, and he had broken them in wonderfully. I was very grateful. And when I moved here, he was 5 years sober, which was pretty cool. So I got this coffee commitment, and like I told you, I had been fairly shy and all, and so I was feeling very exposed, and there was a sliding glass partition, from the kitchen into the meeting room, and it was the big meeting up in Healdsburg on Friday nights, and so I would go in there to make coffee, and I'd slide. I'd do it real quietly, too, so nobody would hear it. Slide it closed so nobody could see me, and then one day, oh, good Lord, his name was Nick, comes walking in, and he just grabbed that thing and shoved it open and goes, "Hi!" Scared the holy pants. After that, I just gave up. Now, our egos come back, right? So we start feeling a little bit better, and we start getting a little spring in our step and a little twinkle in our eye. Well, at least that's what I was told. And pretty soon, that coffee commitment, which I thought was only going to last for a month, I got tricked. It lasted for 6 months, and by the end of that 6 months, I'm prancing around, I'm fanning out the napkins, I'm buying the special cookies, I'm getting the coffee. I even have my own brewing that's special flavored coffee in the back just for me and anybody I really like. And so it happened. It happened to me. I start secretarying a meeting at Doyle Park. End up doing that for a year because I'm trading off with a guy, so we're doing every other week. I start secretarying here, and that ends up being for a year. Thank you guys very much for all of the people who railroaded me into that one because so then I'm here for a year secretarying. I start getting into intergroup, get on the board. First time railroaded and tricked again. AA is very tricky, people. I showed up to an intergroup meeting. I wasn't even an intergroup rep. I had gone with my friend Noel. Noel says, "Hey, let's hang out. I'm going to intergroup." I go, "Okay, all right, spend some time with you." We arrive early. My dear friend Bob Pine is the chair at the time. And he's messing around with these microphones up at the table up front, where the big people sit. And he says, "Hey, Karen, can you do me a favor?" And the first thought is, oh, he needs someone to set up the audio equipment, right? And I go, "Of course, Bob, whatever you want." He says, "I need a recording secretary. You want the job? You going to take it?" And I went, "Oh, man." And are you sure you just don't want the sound done? And so I said, okay. So then, those notes, the notes that go into the newsletter every week, I was the one typing those up, and I was going to these committee meetings and doing all that. And then the next year I stayed on the intergroup board and did the seminars, which were a lot of fun. Ended up doing some on outside drugs or prescription drugs and alcoholism and the God thing and stuff that I found interesting. And that was a blast. That was a blast, getting those speakers. And so my service kind of petered out. I got railroaded again. I got tricked again into sponsoring. I had told my third sponsor I do not want to sponsor. And she said, okay, so she knows how hard-headed I am. So we negotiated, and she said, okay, Karen, you don't have to sponsor as long as you stand up in every meeting or say something in every meeting. You have to announce your name and share. And I was like, okay, no biggie. So I'm doing it. She's going, how's it going? I go, oh, I'm doing what you're telling me. I'm sharing every meeting. Yeah, no worries. Unfortunately for me, we didn't normally go to the same meetings, and somehow we ended up at the same meeting one night. And I get called on to share. It's a newcomer meeting. Ask the Basket. It was at the senior center at the time, the big room. And after the meeting, I go running up to my sponsor. Oh, it's so lovely to see you. And she's talking to this newcomer, and she turns to the newcomer and says, hey, do you got a sponsor? She says, no. She said, guess what? Karen's your new sponsor. Dun-dun-dun. And that's how I got my first sponsee. That's how I got my first sponsee. And she broke me in well. Remember, I'm also codependent, so this was an experience, and she did me a great favor. And I got to walk through that experience, and I tell you, I haven't been without a sponsee since. And if it weren't for my sponsees, I probably would have never gotten back into that big book again. I couldn't relate to hardly anything in that big book except for the chapter of more about alcoholism. When I got to that part, I think it was my first week, because that sponsor had also told me the first sponsor had told me to read the first 164 pages, and when I got to that chapter, I had not known that I had held out that I could drink like a normal person sometime in the future, and that was crushed. That was crushed by that chapter, and I had to grieve that idea. I knew I was an alcoholic now, but I thought I could change that. I thought I could go back. After all, I had lived most of my life not being an alcoholic. So that was hugely important. The other part that was hugely important in that book is, I believe, on page 33, and it was that real small paragraph about women, and it said, women we often find get sicker quicker. And I was like, finally, something I can relate to. So those two parts of the big book were very important to me, but I probably would not have gotten back into it again if I did not have sponsees. And I am telling you, every time I go through the big book, it's amazing. Every time I get to hear my sponsees' fifth steps, every time I get to experience those things, my world gets bigger and larger and more beautiful. And trust me, there have been times I've sat in meetings going, I want the hell out of here. I don't like you. I don't like you. I don't like you. This meeting is stupid. Oh my God. Look at that hair. Who do they think they are? All of that. All of that. And there were times in that first year of sobriety I was hearing the same people over and over again, and the only way I stayed in those meetings was telling myself, you're being of service just by sitting here. So I'm telling you, if you ever get into a meeting and you think you're going to blow your brains out, I want to tell you, you are doing an amazing job, because for that newcomer or for somebody else, even those people who have been around in a while and want to go out again, that are not getting it, your ability to sit in that chair and say that you're an alcoholic is huge. You don't know who might be identifying with you in the room. It's imperative that we're also varied. It's imperative that what works for me doesn't necessarily work for you. It is imperative to the well-being of our souls that we find out, how do we put this program in our life and make it work for us in the way that's going to bring us the most health and the most happiness being an alcoholic. We are so much. We are so much more than being just an alcoholic. But this is something that is intrinsically a part of us, and it needs to be honored, and it needs to be addressed, and we need to say it. So on those days that I don't really feel like going to a meeting, I usually go to one anyway. And at the very least, in those meetings, I can say to myself, I'm not other. I'm human, just like the rest of these people. So thank you very much.